Hey folks, my name is John Lee and welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I talked about Unit 124's attempt to assassinate President Park Chung-hee, and I ended the video with a bit of a cliffhanger. I asked why South Korea did not actually respond militarily to North Korea's provocation. And today's video was supposed to be a continuation of that episode. However, as you might or might not be aware, a lot of things have been going on in Korea the past few days. I am, of course, referring to the coronavirus. And because of all these crazy things that have been developing in Korea, I feel like it is a little superfluous to be talking about an historical event that took place more than 50 years ago. So, while I will still eventually go back to talking about Unit 124 and all of its subsequent events, today I want to spend some time talking about current events. Now, this is YouTube, so I'm not exactly sure when you're all watching this, but just so we're all on the same page, I've uploaded this video on Monday, August 24th, but I'm actually recording this on Sunday, August 23rd. So I don't know when you're watching this video, but there's a very good chance that by the time that you're watching this video, some of the information that I'm going to be providing you today might be a bit out of date already. So let's just keep that in mind. Now let's start with some background information first. August 15th is South Korea's National Liberation Day. And every year on that day, there are massive rallies that takes place in downtown Seoul. And this year was no different. This year, about 20,000 people gathered in downtown Seoul to protest for various reasons. Now, these protesters included members of the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions. It included people who were protesting against the April 15th parliamentary elections, which they swear was rigged. And there were also people who were protesting against the South Korean government's real estate policy. And of course, there were also a lot of Christian churches that were out to protest against the South Korean government in general. But now fast forward to 8 days on August 23rd, 2020, and in the past 8 days alone, South Korea has seen more than 2,600 new coronavirus cases. Now, compared to other countries in the world where there are a lot more infections, 2,600 might not seem like that big of a number. But for South Korea, this is a huge spike. Let's remember that over the past few months, South Korea was one of the few countries in the world that was praised by many other countries, including the WHO, for properly handling this pandemic. But right now, with this third wave of the virus going on, yes, it is a third wave, things are getting a little dicey. Now, I just mentioned that a whole bunch of churches took part in the protests. Now, this name is going to be a little bit important. Among the churches that were most prominent in the protests, the one that is currently in the news the most right now is the Sarangjeil Church, which is led by this man, Pastor Kwang-hoon. And we'll be talking about this man and this church in particular a little bit more later. One of the methods that the South Korean government has used to try to keep a lid on this pandemic is through contact tracing. And recently, it was discovered that one of the congregants of the Sarangjeil Church had contracted the virus. And so the government tried to seek the cooperation of the church in the form of getting names of its congregants. Every church keeps a list of its congregants. However, to put it mildly, the Sarangjeil Church has been rather uncooperative. But to be fair, the Sarangjeil Church is not the only ones who have been uncooperative. A lot of people took part in the protest in Seoul on August 15th. It's estimated that almost 1,500 people traveled from Busan, one of the southernmost cities in the country, all the way to Seoul to take part in these rallies on August 15th. However, when the Busan city government requested the churches to provide the names of all their congregants, the Busan city government received only 63 names. And as for the Sarangjeil Church that I mentioned earlier, they didn't just start to appear in the news starting August 15th. They've been in the news for quite a long time now. Although the government has banned large rallies, although the government has tried to persuade churches to close down, the Sarangjeil Church was one of the churches that was really adamant in its decision to stand against government policies and government rules. In fact, the Sarangtila Church and their members have been involved in quite a few scuffles with the police due to their refusal to obey city ordinances that prevented large gatherings. In fact, when healthcare workers tried to enter the Sarangtila Church's compound to search and possibly seize any information that they can find relating to the church congregants lists, members of the church blocked healthcare workers from entering and they demanded that they produce a warrant. Eventually, the healthcare workers and the police and the prosecutors did come back with a warrant, and it took about 4.5 hours to find all the information that they needed. Due to the sheer size of the protests that took place in downtown Seoul on August 15th, this virus is not just taking place in Seoul. It is also taking place in the Gyeonggi province, which is the closest province to Seoul, and it is also spreading nationwide. Churches all over the country are reporting new infection cases. In fact, one Sarangtila church member who had tested positive for the virus ran away from the hospital and was only found 25 hours later after he ran away. He was found in a cafe where there were 40 people inside when he was discovered. Naturally, public anger has been mounting against the Sarangtila church. In fact, a South Korean National Assemblyman, who is a member of the ruling Minju Party, even went so far as to call those members of the Sarangtila Church terrorists. Of course, the Sarangtila Church, for their part, also responded as well. They printed their op-eds in three of the largest South Korean conservative daily newspapers. And in their editorial, they published quite a few interesting things, shall we say. For example, one of the statements that they made in their editorial was that the Sarangtila Church actively took part in the government's quarantine measures, but that they had been infiltrated by communists and pro-North Korean sympathizers who attempted to discredit the church by infiltrating their members and spreading the coronavirus. Other than that doozy, the editorial was also full of other evidence-free conspiracy theories. For example, they also claimed that the government was out to inflate their coronavirus patients numbers by purposefully and deliberately saying that all Sarangtila Church congregants have been infected, and they also blamed the South Korean government's lax immigration policies for allowing Chinese visitors to spread what they refer to as quote-unquote the Wuhan virus to spread all over Korea. Now, since August 15th, South Korea has seen new coronavirus cases go up by triple digits almost every day. And so, in response to this new spike in the coronavirus, the South Korean government has decided to upgrade its social distancing guidelines to level 2. Now, initially, this level 2 upgrade was meant to be focused only around Seoul and the Gyeonggi province, where there are the most number of new coronavirus cases. However, as the number of cases are popping up all over the country, the government has decided that the level 2 upgrade will apply to the whole country, which was started today on August 23rd, 2020. However, some members of the National Assembly are suggesting that level 2 might not be sufficient to properly combat the coronavirus now, and they are suggesting that the only way forward is to upgrade the country's social distancing guidelines to level 3. Now, level 3 has not yet been attempted by the South Korean government. So far, there has been no need to go all the way up to level 3. However, level 3 is pretty much the closest that it will come down to a total lockdown. The South Korean government has not yet locked down the country to combat the coronavirus starting from the very beginning. There has been no lockdown in South Korea. However, with each new passing day, especially with this third wave, it appears that this level 3 and this lockdown might not be as unthinkable as it was before. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has not been able to hide his schadenfreude when he heard about the new virus cases in South Korea. Ever since the United States and South Korea saw the first coronavirus cases in their respective countries, which happened to be on the same day, the South Korean government has responded to the virus in a more competent manner than the US government did under his administration. And that point has been made to him many times. And so, this is what President Donald Trump had to say about South Korea's new coronavirus cases.
South Korea, it's over. It's over. Big breakout yesterday. You know, it's a tough deal.
Charming. Now, earlier I said that the South Korean health officials were able to obtain the needed warrant to search and seize any information that they needed from the Sarangjil Church's compound. And it took about 4.5 hours for them to find all the information that they needed. However, the documents that the South Korean government has seized might not be enough. And that's because the South Korean government discovered not too long ago that the Sarangjil Church has not been keeping accurate logs. You see, it's been discovered that some of the Sarangjil Church's congregants have been writing down false names and false numbers and false addresses in their logbooks. And so, for the second time, the South Korean government has decided to use a clause in the country's disease prevention laws to compel South Korea's largest telecom companies to share information. Now, as you are aware, in order to use a cell phone, there has to be cell phone towers. And cell phone towers all keep records. And so, the South Korean government has compelled the three largest telecom companies, SK Telecom, KT, and LG, to share that information with the government. Combined with the documents that the government seized, the information that is provided by the cell phone companies will surely help the government to narrow down its search lists. Now, I mentioned just now that this is the second time that the South Korean government has decided to use this clause. The first time that the government used this clause was back in May, when there was a new cluster of coronavirus cases that was cropping up in Itaewon. This was the second wave of the coronavirus. The reason why the government decided to use this clause back then was because the coronavirus cases could be linked to some nightclubs in the Itaewon area, which were known to be gay bars. And homosexuality is still taboo in South Korea, and so there were a lot of people who were hesitant to come forward. And so the South Korean government felt compelled to use this data to try to find as many people as possible in order to make sure that the second wave was not as destructive as people feared it was going to be. However, due to a lot of the conspiracy theories that have been spun by the Sarangjil Church, a lot of people have been uncooperative, and therefore the South Korean government has felt compelled to use this rather drastic measure yet again. Just as it did back then, the use of this clause is a cause for concern. While the South Korean government might have a valid excuse this time to prevent the further spread of the coronavirus, the fact that the government can actually collect people's cell phone data is a little concerning, and people who care about privacy should definitely be worried about this. But that leads us to an interesting debate question. Is it preferable for people to surrender our privacy so that the government can better protect our health? Or is this a step toward an Orwellian future? This is not a debate question that it will be limited to only Korea. And how we answer this question will likely determine the rest of the 21st century. Alright, that about wraps it up. If you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to click on the like and the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. And if you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. My name is John Day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.